Hello, fellow Basement Joes, and in today's video is going to be something pretty different. So, I have a bunch of fictional universes, and I will be going over one of them today. Now, one thing to note, I am actually just kind of really shit at coming up with names. So, all my fictional universes are just kind of named Nameless. So, I do not have a, actual name for this universe yet. But the idea with this universe, and, this story, is that it's not so much a story as it is a what's the word? A setting. It's more like a setting. I'm most of my universes are more just like settings as opposed to like a hard actual universe. Like there isn't like a single story. Anyway, so in this setting, this is a World War II alternate history where America still wins World War II, but a lot of changes happen around Woodrow Wilson's presidency. Woodrow Wilson in this time period is somehow worse than in real life. So Woodrow Wilson essentially becomes almost like a clan, he becomes almost like a cult leader. So Woodrow Wilson had a lot of not so good ideas, such as hyper-intense United States supremacy over Europeans, believing the United States was the only country where people were actually civilized and, only country where people could actually, make peace and have rationality. He was also a big fan of segregation, just racism in general, ties to the Klan. Well, in this timeline, he's almost, again, like a cult leader. So, what exactly do I mean by that? As in, he starts his own new political party in this timeline, known as, I don't know an official name, but let's just call it, like, the Super American Party or something. Anyway, so, or like the America First Party. Oh, the America Peace Party. How about the American Peace Party? Well, the American Peace Party has some pretty wacky views, and going into World War going into World War II, all of our World War II presidents are not actually in power. It is mostly people in this, new political party. And so, World War II goes fairly similar to how it did, in the actual timeline. Except, Project Unthinkable? Project Unthinkable was a hypothetical that the British came up with. Where, essentially, right after World War II was over, we would essentially kick off a new war with the Soviets. So, Britain did not want Britain to be under siege by a thorough massive power. So the idea was they would get the Americans and German prisoners together, and the British themselves, and they would invade Russia and also use nuclear weapons as strategical, pretty much use tactical nukes to limit Russia's capabilities. This would essentially mean that beating Russia wouldn't be too hard because we would have German war prisoners. We would have America using tactical nukes and, American muscle, and, all that stuff. So in this timeline, Project Unthinkable actually happens. Except Britain does not remain independent. Britain does not... It does not go according to plan for Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill gets assassinated by the United States, and Britain essentially gets annexed because all these British troops are, fighting Russia. Meanwhile, America was very strategic on making sure that there was a large amount of American troops on Britain. And due to the fear of American nuclear weapons, Britain does submit with, Winston Churchill dead. Now, after this, the United States becomes a just unfathomable superpower. It is the only country, without the USSR to depose them, it's just the United States as the world's only nuclear power. So Britain is annexed, Canada is quickly annexed after, and they're both incorporated into the United States. Russia is radioactive ash, or a new government that is just very submissive, does not want to get wiped out again. And most of the world follows. Europe still gets rebuilt after World War II, but they get rebuilt as essentially American puppet states. They still are allowed to, have a military, but the military has to essentially be closely monitored by the U.S., and is essentially their military solves U.S. interests, and their governments, for the most part, again, really only exist to prop up the United States. For example, if the United States needs coal, and let's say Germany has coal, they will be shipping that coal to the United States. Again, because the United States is the only nuclear power, and the American Peace Party has essentially taken over the U.S. Like, Democrat and Republican are just minor parties at this point. It's really only them. And they have this just massive god complex over essentially the rest of the whole world. And so because of this, the whole world eventually, over time, becomes very submissive. Except Japan. Japan still gets nuked. Except Japan actually becomes, like, an actual, like, America's only, like, actual ally and equal in this timeline. As opposed to a direct servant like, you know, Germany, or just incorporated into the United States like with Britain. Now, why does America do this with Japan and give them such good treatment? Well, in real life, there was this thing called Unit 731. 731 was a horrific unit that will just... They did so much bullshit to the Chinese people. Like, they killed so many Chinese people. The reason we know humans are 70% water is because they essentially they essentially turned a bunch of Chinese civilians into beef jerky and realized that they were 70% lighter. That's also why we have so much knowledge on hypothermia, because they would just give hypothermia to people. That's why they had, you know, so much knowledge on all these things, because they were just very evil people. And in real life, they were actually pardoned in exchange for their information. Well, in this world, they were told to push it up to 11. The United States loved these guys. And so, Imperial Japan was still kind of restructured into, you know, modern-day Japan, except they were still just really fucking evil. So, Japan is essentially still suppressing China, and if China essentially fights back, a certain Chinese city might be nuked, making China, you know, essentially submit. Meaning, you know, Chinese people are working in mines, you know, getting iron for, you know, the United States and Japan. So the United States and Japan are still allies, but the United States is the only guys with nuclear weapons. They're very careful about keeping a tight grip on those nuclear weapons. And so because of this, over the time period, you know, 1950s, 1970s, like, if Vietnam were to happen, because the United States, because... what's that country called? France is essentially just a United States puppet. If Vietnam were to happen in this world, it would essentially just be the United States nuking a bunch of people, just committing a shitload of war crimes, then kind of going home. Like, the United States is really gung-ho about showing any country that if they rebel or fight back in any way, they will get nuked or they will get very badly punished in some sort of way. Like, all it takes for a city to get nuked is the United States says, hey, in 5 years, we need you to ramp up iron production and we need this much iron. They fall behind, they get nuked. So because of that, the entire world is essentially kissing America's ass. And the main point of this story is the United States is unfathomably rich because of this. Like, it is wealth you cannot imagine. Like, for example, let's say early 2000s. The average American is essentially living in a mansion. It is... There is a standard, like, military service where every young man does have to join the military. And so essentially, the only thing the United States is essentially producing is soldiers. And the reason this is because they just do not want to lose this power. And to an extent, the United States has also, in, like, again, later on, not right after World War II, but the United States did go through some restructuring. The United States became somewhat of a autocracy. Is that the right word? I might be using the wrong word here. So if I am using the wrong word, I'm just going to describe what I'm talking about, because, again, I might just be using the wrong word there. Autocracy might not be the right word. Essentially, everyone starts with an equal deck of cards, and you have to work their way up. There is no, like... oh, my dad did this, so I'm gonna do this. And that's like a carpenter or something. But no, like, position of power being split that way. Pretty much, if you make it into a position of power in the U.S. military or government, your family is essentially forbidden from being in a position of power for X amount of years. I do not have a current, like, amount of years set up. And this is so that way the United States doesn't go fat and lazy, because the American Peace Party is terrified of the three-generation policy, where you'll have strong men make good times, then, you know, weak men make bad times. So they're terrified. They do not want to lose their global dominance, because they're terrified all it takes for them to be lax and a little country to develop nuclear weapons. Especially due to how brutal they are to the entire world. They do not want the world to be as brutal to them as they are to everyone else. So the American Peace Party are very, very gung-ho about just essentially suppressing the entire world. Like, for example, the internet does still exist worldwide, but really the only people who have access to it are Americans, and it's a very censored internet. There really is no freedom of speech in this world. And the rest of the world does have internet, but it's really only the rest of the world's militaries and the rest of the world's governments. And again, they themselves don't really have it. They essentially just have to... They do have it, but they get it very regulated. They don't get to talk freely. They only get to essentially do it with the US watching and listening. So yeah, the entire world is kind of really fucking... I would say that this is actually somewhat inspired by Hunger Games. You know, we had District 12 where everything just fucking sucked. And then, you know, we had District 1 where everything was just doing fucking fantastic. Like, everyone was super rich. Except District 1 were not these super fat, lazy people in, you know, Nameless. They are these super people who are just gung-ho about war, gung-ho about killing. District 1... in the Hunger Games didn't really produce anything except order. They relied on everyone else to do everything. These guys fully make their own military equipment. They, you know, they essentially, they kind of do everything themselves when it comes to the military, when it comes to soldiers. I would say, like, Mexico would be kind of like District 2, where they, like, do a lot of construction. Mexico is a puppet state in this world, where they essentially, you know, they come over here for cheaper labor, and again, them being cheap labor in the US, they go home to Mexico after working for like a decade, and they're really well off. So, yeah, that's kind of the state of the world, where every young man, well, state of the US at least, where every young man is, you know, forced to join the military for X amount of years, depending on, you know, how useful they are and whatnot. And, yeah, that's the whole world. Where, essentially, everyone's kissing. And this is just kind of interesting hypothetical. Like, how would, for example, a British rebel communicate with a French rebel, you know, them fucking using messenger pigeons or something? It's a very interesting type of world. I haven't really come up with any stories to fill the world, so although I do think the world's fairly interesting, the world at this moment is fairly dry. So yeah, I'm pretty happy about the story. I think the general concept of the setting is pretty good, and currently the working name for this is called Nameless Alternate History. That is not a good name. I am looking for a better name. But yeah, that's the general idea of this. Now, there are like a lot of different things that I do find kind of interesting about this world that I came up with. For example, the military. So we all have, of course we have, you know, the Navy, Air Force, you know, all that stuff. Essentially in this world, there is a different branch of the military that essentially stands above all the rest. Oh. Excuse me, that is essentially just a war crime division, and they specialize in psychological warfare, you know, chemical warfare, of course, nuclear, radiation. These guys essentially will brutalize a population so badly where they will never stand up again. Like, these guys are the war crime guys. And they work directly underneath the United States. Now, the United States, like, government is kind of weird in this timeline. So we still have Congress, and, you know, we still have the Senate, you know, we still have the president, and, again, just like in this timeline, just like in our timeline, you still vote for your governor, you vote for your congressman, you know, you vote for all this stuff, you know, you vote for your Supreme Court guys, and yeah, you do vote for the president, but in this timeline, there is essentially a council that stands above the president that are the real guys in charge. These guys are kind of like... These guys are what people think the stonemasons are like, where they're actually just running everything, except they're not really in the shadows. And these guys are like kind of... They're very culty. They're very creepy. They are very odd. They are that cult I was talking about earlier that essentially worship Woodrow Wilson and worship the American dream and the American idea. And again, after you are inducted, you can't ask to join. It's something that's really invite only. Like, for example, if there's a congressman they like, if there's a general they like, if there's a businessman they like, they might get invited to this. And again, after you are put in charge or, added to this council, your family is forbade from being in any real position of power for decades after you step down. Unless they already held the position of power before you held the position of power. Then when they step down, no one else. But that family is bathed for X amount of time, and that's that's to prevent people from going fat and lazy, because they do realize that the United States is not invulnerable, and they are scared of that. They don't want to end up like the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire was so powerful that really they only defeat themselves. They don't want to end up like that. They want to reign for eternally. So yeah, a very weird, like, cultish kind of pseudo religion. One powerful organization is the United States Church. So the United States is still Protestant, but there is like an official Protestant church run by the United States government to, help keep people in line, help push propaganda, stuff like that. There's also the Entertainment League, which embodies that the whole thing is bread and circuses. They will essentially give massive grants and resources to animators, to movie makers, to video game makers, anyone essentially to keep the American people entertained and happy. Keep the Americans thinking about, playing Helldivers. Don't have them really thinking that, the United States just, a Chinese rebellion just happened and the United States just nuked the city. One thing to know about that internet, because again, most of the world does not have internet, and the information is very sensitive around the world, most Americans don't really know what's happening outside of the U.S. A lot of Americans don't even know what's happening outside their state. Like, there is still a media. The media is so state-controlled. And they are feeding very simple, calm narratives, constantly saying the United States is number one. And so, yeah, this is a fairly interesting type world that I've come up with. At least I think it's so. I've told only a handful of people about this. No, I think I've only told one person about this world. So, yeah, I originally came up with this world when I was a kid, and I was a big history guy when I was a kid, and I was just thinking, hey, could the United States just kind of take over the world after World War II? And I thought about, and again, I had limited information back then, I think I was like maybe 13 or something, maybe like 14 at the oldest, and I thought maybe using, just strong-arming nuclear weapons if they did Project Unthinkable, and this is kind of just like a massive expansion of that world. I never watched. There's this like movie called The Man in the High Castle. I only watched like an episode or two when I was a kid, or when I was younger with my mom. But even though it was only a few episodes, I would say that this is at least partially inspired by, because the United States, again, Germany is a U.S. puppet. But the United States has a lot of Nazi tendencies. Like, again, Woodrow Wilson was a big fan of eugenics. He has a fucking cult. The Woodrow Wilson American Peace Party cult runs the United States, Christian church. So yeah, it is a really, this world, like, okay, this world has a lot of, like, really interesting moral questions, because you can have a job that you're really not working hard. Like, you spend a couple years in the military, you get out and you become a carpenter, because they will teach you how to, do certain skills like that in the military. Carpenter is like 3 days a week max. You can get a 2-day-a-week job and support your family. Like, you can support an entire family and a large house and 2 cars off of a 2-day-a-week job. And the job isn't even like, oh, some 16-hour shift. No, it's just an 8-hour shift. It is wealth you cannot imagine in this world. Like, the Rocky Mountains are, like, half carved out in this world and filled with, bunkers and command centers. Again, the average American's so rich. And so, that's a very interesting, like, moral question of the story is, do you fight back? Do you, like, even then, can you fight back? Do you know any better? Because by the time we get into, the 2020s, people don't know a different world. Like, it's just, this is the way it's been. And even if you did know, would you? Like, you get you could get a large house, a car, everything, like, all the basic essentials of life. Like, you could have, steak and all this stuff. Working just a super easy job. And again, women do not really work in this timeline because, again, the United States is scared of losing its global dominance. So the United States government in this timeline, the kind of dickheaded United States government, really kind of suppressed feminism and was a big fan of, a working man and a housewife. And so because of this, because of also the constant propaganda to have kids, in 2025, the United States population is like I think it's like 500 million, and that's with essentially no immigration. Okay, to be fair, there are like a lot of uh, workers that come in from outside the country to like do a lot of like actual like really hard work, like carving out the fucking Rocky Mountains. Those are not counted as citizens; they are just people. But like women aren't like counted as full citizens. Like women don't get to vote. Women don't get to essentially have any. Women don't get to vote or do anything until they have kids. So for a woman to like actually become like a valuable citizen, she has to have children. Meanwhile, a man has to serve in the military. Except like men are required, serve in the military, while women don't necessarily have to have kids. But even like the tax code just really fuck over women who can't have kids. And any undesirable people are again, they get noodled essentially, which is really fucked. So you have this hyper-tyrannical Nazi-esque government. Honestly, being a citizen in the United States is kind of like taking a deal with the devil. Because if you're a man, you have to serve in the military, and your job is not to protect the United States. Your job is to suppress the entire world, and to have the world be so afraid that they fork over their resources. Like, they might go to Venezuela and be like, hey, bacon prices went up by 2%. We need 100,000 pigs a year. In less than a year. And if they can't do that, your job is to go in and brutalize them so badly that no one else would ever... You could ask a country to do something, and they would devote their entire economy to do that, to avoid the punishment. So you are objectively fucking evil. You are objectively a fucking bully just stealing people's lunch money. Except way worse. So it is truly a deal with the devil. But also, if you take that deal, you are so unfathomably rich. You can retire at 50, but even then, you're probably gonna keep working till you're like 60, because what the fuck do you have to do? You're working like 2 days a week, 3 days a week max. Like, you can work more, because obviously some people want to work more, and if you do work more, you would get even more wealthy, but it is just a level of wealth unbelievable. So yeah, this story is something I've been thinking about a lot recently. Like, I've been coming up with it for a couple months, and yeah, this is something I really like. Like, for example, there is so many resources in this world. In the US, I'm not saying the whole world. The whole world is kind of really fucked. Like, quote-unquote wealthy European countries like Germany, in this timeline, they're a lot more like, their wealth is a lot more similar to Poland or Russia. So they're not exactly starving, but most of their excess resources, their entire economy is essentially giving shit to the U.S. And so because it's obviously holding themselves. So and that's for a well-off country. That's for a country, the U.S. In this timeline, we still built up, Germany after World War II.
Reminder: signs of disloyalty should be reported to the democracy officer.
I don't know if you can hear the in-game audio. Like, I don't know if you could just hear the voice saying subordination must be, reported to a democracy officer. That's some bullshit that would happen in this world. Or the world I created. This is like a hyper-tyrannical world. Where it's... I feel like I'm yapping. I feel like I'm running around circles. I feel like I gave, like, a really detailed, explanation, and now I'm just yapping and just fucking yapping about bullshit. So, yeah. This is the general concept of Nameless alternate history. What do you think about it? Do you have any ideas for stories? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Yeah, I will catch you later. Yeah, see ya.